This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horror, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jesse Carter, and this week we're talking with Mo Moshaty about her collection, Love the Sinner. Mo Moshaty is a horror writer, lecturer, producer, and cognitive behavioral therapist. As a core member of the Nyx Horror Collective, Mo has partnered with the Shudder Channel and Stowe Story Labs to create opportunities for women-identifying creatives over 40 in the horror genre. She's also the editor-in-chief of their new online magazine, Night Tide. Her stories can be found in a quaint and curious volume of Gothic tales, 206-word stories, her debut novella, Love the Sinner, and the forthcoming Clara Violence, Tales of Tarot and Torment, Volumes 1 and 2. Welcome to the show, Mo.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
So I have an icebreaker question for you.
Sure.
Is 2024 the year of making horror micro shorts?
Yes. Yes, it is. I've been wanting to do it for a really long time, really stemming from our 13 Minutes of Horror, the project we did with Nyx and the Shudder Channel, where those were 60-second horror films. There's definitely ways in horror to get in and get out of a story quickly, and I think that I really need to be conscientious of working on and building my own film catalog as best as I can this year. So we're going to be brainstorming ideas this week. That was our goal as a team. So we're going to be trying.
There are different lengths of fiction, like flash fiction, drabbles, microfiction. Is there any kind of working definition for what a micro short is?
I think for me, micro shorts have always been anything that is up to 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes in a film. Sometimes people will say 4 or 5, but I feel like once you kind of crack the 3-minute mark, you're into short film territory. Between 3 and 12 is the sweet spot, they say, for short films. And then beyond that, it's just an extended short and then into a regular feature. But I think something like the film Host that was done through the pandemic is a 60-minute feature film. So that's kind of breaking the mold there, where we think films have to be 90 minutes in order to be a film, 120 minutes. So I think that hopefully the shorter the film, the snappier it can be, and it also is pretty cost effective to do something so short.
I know that novellas are having a moment. Hopefully novella films will also have a moment.
Yeah. Short form has always been where my love is just writing short stories. I'm working on my first novel currently right now, which is, I have to think to myself that it is writing a series of short stories that you're putting together. The same way you would put a feature script together. Like these are, half-hour shows or something like that, kind of trick your brain into doing that. But I think the burst of short form to film has been so nice. I mean, you look at Stephen King's career, you look at Joe Hill and the Black Phone. Hopefully we can have a moment that keeps going that way. That would be a great trajectory for me personally, but for horror lit at large.
So much of writing, at least for horror, I feel, is trying to set that tone and then creating extremely graphic images with words. And it doesn't mean that every story is a slasher story, but still you have to be very specific if you want to create a shocking or surprising image for your reader. Especially if it's monstrous or non-human or out of the blue. Do you think that video is a strength in terms of making a horror story snappier? Because you don't need all that time on the page. You can just flash an image, or you can just show a color of light, and that has all this association.
That's an excellent question. I think for film, there's a couple of shortcuts you can take. I mean, if you, like you said, if you don't have the pages of build up and setting the scene and, telling, not showing at this point, you have that shortcut for film to convey that heaviness of a moment in a couple of frames. But I think what's really beautiful about the marriage of literature from an adaptation standpoint and film is that you have a source material to kind of draw your own conclusions of. Even if the words are there for you already, every reader's going to glean what they think the room looks like, what they think the knife looks like, what they think the scene looks like. And I think that film really gives the literary piece a new life in so many different ways. So I think that they work really synergistically together. They can help each other. But I think what's really pretty about an adaptation from that is just the many incantations it can have afterwards. So I do think it helps.
I am a big fan of the haunted house and the spooky maze, all the Halloween stuff, but I'm not a big lover of jump scares. Like when it comes to movies, I feel like the jump scare is a bit of a sort of a cheap thrill. I like slow burn a little more. When it comes to micro shorts, do you think that is a crutch, the jump scare? Because you don't have as much time to
Sure.
create dread and suspense.
I think it can be in something like a micro short because you expect that, right? That's going to be the ending piece or the middle piece. But I think what's interesting about some of the micro shorts that I've watched, I'm huge Alter fan. I'm always watching shorts on Alter. Is seeing like some of the shorter ones really have that long game and that long dread that you don't expect from a short. That something that really succinct.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are the ones that win. I feel like jump scares in films that short, either you have to start off that way or you have to end that way. It can't be your sole scare of the film. So I can see where you would feel like it gives it away. You're like, oh, that was cheap. And the film's already over. Credits.
Right. You get your bang for your buck and then it's over. And then you're like,
And we're
well,
done
I guess
here.
that's what we were waiting for. Yeah.
Lather, rinse, repeat. No, I'm a psychological horror writer first and foremost. That's where Love the Sinner really works in that genre, and I really like writing that way. And it's really from my behavioral science standpoint that emotional evocation and that mental piece where I really work to reaction of folks, and that's not necessarily the mental state of all of my characters, but how my audience receives it and how they kind of move throughout it. So there's not a lot of jump scares at work because of that. Because I guess I am a long game player, but I feel like that's you get a little bit more payoff that way. You invest in the story a little bit deeper if you are kind of carrying them along a little bit.
Yeah, I think there is a huge difference between flipping on the lights and screaming in someone's face as opposed to that sequence in A Stir of Echoes where Kevin Bacon looks under the couch and he sees the shoe. And it's like
Hmm.
the worst thing you can possibly imagine because it's been set up and it pays off so well. Like that is a
Hmm.
legitimately chilling sequence.
Yeah, and I love that movie because he's so fixated on this goal because he's a skeptic. And because this little kernel of proof is going to help him believe, it opens his mind up to all of the information. And she kind of makes a little hole in there and has solves the case. I just love that film.
Before we dive into your collection, can you tell me a little bit more about the Nyx Horror Collective?
Sure. We were kind of founded in 2019. Pre-pandemic, we had the idea of women identifying creatives as a co-op, where if someone needed a director of photography on a film, who could we recommend? If someone needed a line producer, who could we recommend? And it was this pool of women and women identifying creatives that were really just looking for work. And we wanted to build more of a women-led horror content team. So for us, it was having more of a Rolodex. And as the pandemic hit, we weren't meeting as much, life kind of took its toll on everybody. And our conglomerate kind of fell away a little bit. And we were really left with the four of us. And it was the two founders of the group, Kelly Krause and Melody Cooper, and Lisa Kroger and myself anchored in to really kind of secure us into this is what we're going to do. We want to keep creating content. And it's really just not necessarily the last four standing, but the ones that really wanted to work together and create something. Through the pandemic, we created a dark sci-fi podcast radio play that we wanted to shop. And then things being what they were in the post-pandemic, I say post like as if it's ever going to go away. Think about how we can give more accessibility to creatives out there that weren't finding work anymore, that the work had dried up or because of the pandemic they weren't working. And how could we provide accessibility for those filmmakers? So we created the 13 Minutes of Horror Film Festival, which is a collection of 13 60-second horror films. And we had this idea and we reached out to a few platforms and said this is what our goal is. We want to give more access to not just creatives that are working in the genre, but historically marginalized creatives that are working in the horror genre that don't have the accessibility, creatives that have a disability that can't get on set, that can't travel very far, that have travel constraints, financial constraints. Everyone was having financial constraints. So how can we offer this as a free access? And we've always done the free accessibility piece. And we landed with Shutter because they really believed in our mission of really giving more accessibility to indie filmmakers, historically marginalized creatives. Our theme that year was folklore, which is right up the Shutter team's alley. They absolutely love international folklore. And we set it up and we're able to get it onto Shutter. We started in January, started collecting submissions in February, and by the end of August, I believe it was on Shutter Channel. So
Wow.
pretty fast work. And we really couldn't have done it without the filmmakers themselves, but also to the Shutter team and just really the support from day one of being, this is what our mission is, this is what we're hoping for, and having somebody completely be on board with that was super invaluable. We did it for a second year with them, and then we took a year to concentrate on our personal projects. And within that year, we connected with Stowe Story Labs to create a fellowship for women writers that were working in the genre that were over 40. Because again, accessibility for women is very slim in this industry from a film standpoint, less than 3% when behind the camera. So that's where we really wanted to give that accessibility piece. And for creating the fellowships cost money. Fellowships sometimes are thousands of dollars, airline fare, hotel stays, room and board, paying for food, just kind of getting around. And a lot of that takes money. And for that first year, a lot of the women that were in the over 40 category have full-time jobs, have children, are taking care of elderly parents, can't be away with having to plan months ahead or take vacation time, or it's something is always in the way of that particular age bracket from chasing the dream. Everyone's like, go get a real job and don't be a writer. It's people want to chase that dream, and if we can make that happen for people, we wanted to. And we are actually in our third year working with Stowe Story Labs for that particular mission. So much happened between the pandemic and the strike in this industry. We just tried to find the needs of the people we wanted to work with and the genre and try to fill that need. And I think we were able to do that both with Shutter and with Stowe, which was really extraordinary for four women who've probably only spent about 3 or 4 days in person together. We built our first 13 minutes of horror without ever meeting each other.
And your platform has expanded into an online magazine. Did you
Yeah.
spearhead that?
That was my idea to kind of keep us going, because I knew we wanted to still be a name in the industry for celebrating and elevating historically marginalized creatives and helping them either create their content or get their content onto a platform somewhere or get their content seen by someone. We still wanted to be that piece. And for me, I've always loved journalism. I work with Fangoria, I've worked with Dread Central, I've worked with a bunch of other outlets just doing horror analysis. In lecturing, I've always just wanted to talk horror and from a journalism standpoint. So for me, it was a no-brainer to create that piece. So as creative director, as editor-in-chief, as website configurer, copy editor, one-man band, being that arm of Nyx has been really, really helpful to like my soul to always keep creating and writing as best as I can and getting eyes on indie writers work. I mean, a lot of the folks that have written for us in analysis and journalism we've been their first byline, and it's really just about accessibility. Accessibility is really easy, guys. That's a really easy thing to do. Open your pages up, stop making young writers or emerging writers jump through hoops to write for your magazine. How do you ever find new voices, new perspectives if you don't let people in? If your pitch is good, if your story is good, I don't care that you haven't written, in Time Magazine, that you have a column on Medium. Like, it's just not important to our corner of the genre and what we're trying to do.
I purposefully skipped over the how'd you get started kind of piece because you have so many other things going on. And I was like, well, we're never going to get to everything. And also your bona fides speak for themselves. But it is interesting to me that you started in screenwriting and now are transitioning to literature, especially because your work is so psychological.
Yeah.
It's so character-based. There's so much interior life to things that I would not guess that you had more of a screenwriting background. I usually think of that as more external.
Yeah, and I think what's been really helpful is that they're not glaringly different, but at least in the ways that I work when I'm writing either or, one medium definitely helps me with the other. Like with my literary pieces, you can be more descriptive. You can pull things out, not just to simply elongate, but emotion or atmosphere and thing. You have that leeway in a literary piece where screenwriting is like, we don't care what he's doing in this action line, just like the actor will do it. Like, just tell me what they're doing. You can tell me how you kind of want them to do it, but other than that, get to the point. Get in and get out of your action lines very quickly. And that particular tactic doesn't work for all scripts because I've read a lot where it's like 3 pages of action until we get someplace. Like that's Better Call Saul has intros like that where there's almost no dialogue and it's just things happening. And that works for that type of show and that type of writing. What I like about what screenwriting has taught me from the literary piece is how to be really descriptive in a really short amount of time, which is like why I love short form stories, because I can arrive as late as possible in a story and leave very quickly, because screenwriting taught me how to do that, dropping you into a story as opposed to like, this is on the farm and and some people are really, really gifted at that. Like Stephen King will give you 40 pages on a curtain and it's fine because it's Stephen King, but he can do that because that's his style and that's his writing, and we expect that elongated description from him because that's how he invokes emotion, is from that description. But what I like is really energizing the story by being like, wait, where are we? What's going on? Oh, this is happening. Okay, we're right here within the story. One of my longest stories in here, in Love the Sinner, it's all told first person. Here's where we are. Let me take you backwards. Which I was like, how do I tell a long story without giving them the beginning? Oh, I figured it out. Drop them into where they are right now. And it's such a simple sounding device, but once you get the hang of being very immediate with your idea, the more fun it is to really sneak that horror in very quickly.
That's definitely a big takeaway I got from film school was arrive late, leave early.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And stop saying suddenly. That was another tip that I found.
Never. You can take suddenly from my cold dead hands. But enough about that. Let's get to your collection, Love the Sinner.
Yeah, it's my fave.
The core of this book are the 7 deadly sins, or 8 in this instance.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you use that as your focus?
Interestingly enough, 3 of these stories they started off as screenplays. This was essentially part of my pitch for my creep show-esque anthology series that I was pitching. That everybody was like, this is amazing, but nobody's doing anthologies right now. And I was like, I feel like they are. So I just was like, you know what? I'm going to create the IP for it and just kind of get it out there. And I thought about elongating each of them into a novel. And then when I kind of looked at the through line of them, I was like, oh, these are really kind of sinful. Like each of them kind of carries a weight to it. And I really just rounded out the collection from there. Some of them are like really to the point, and some of them kind of lay atmospherically on top of them. So that's really where they ended up. And 8, I always say it's 7 and 1 bonus sin, but 8 being what they say is not necessarily one of the cardinal sins, but more of the mortal sins, which is suicide. And I think that was so important for me to add that because of what my background is, especially in mental health. I don't think it's a topic that's discussed enough in the ways of getting to that point and having to hide that point and having to live through that point and kind of work through and masking how that feels to walk around with that feeling. How can I best do that respectfully and not sensationally? And so I just kind of tacked it onto this collection because I felt like it was just really necessary. I didn't feel like I could do the collection without it. And it starts the collection too, which I feel like is really important to give a little bit more body to it. And it's incidentally one of the only stories that I've written straight through, beginning to end, like never got up, just wrote the story straight through. It's one of the stories in my history of literary writing that has had the least edits on it. So it was just a very guttural experience.
I'm glad you included it. It is one of my favorite stories in the collection.
Oh, good.
The story is called A Battle Between Boys. Is this your tribute to Algernon Blackwood?
It is. It is. Thank you for noticing that. That's amazing. Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
You really channeled him. It's
Oh,
such
thank you.
a mesmerizing story. It's set after World War One. It has so much voice and sense of time and place, and then it starts to get a little slippery and get
Mhm,
a little possibly supernatural or psychological. There's also suddenly
mhm,
a
mm.
glimmer of hope,
Yeah.
which is not always expected, but for me, always very welcome in a horror collection.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that. Wow, Algernon, geez. Can you put that on a tapestry for me someplace and hang it on my wall? He said I sounded like Algernon, Mom. But I think what's really important about this story and kind of the way that I wrote it, and it's interestingly enough, we were just at Overlook Festival. It's Mike Flanagan's birthday today. We saw Mike Flanagan collect his Master of Horror award that Overlook had presented him, and we were just finished watching his film Oculus, which is not, if you've seen it, not a whole lot of hope in that film. But it was talking about having his work nowadays, having that glimmer of hope to anchor how heavy the rest of it is. And I think that was really important. And even with writing this story, like I said, I didn't want that sensationalized piece, like you're just watching this man. Perhaps he's unraveling, perhaps he's not. What do we believe? Are we living inside his head? Are we living inside his mask? What's going on? And I wanted there to be hope because some folks do make it over that really horrific piece and that horrific time. And I think that it was important to show that as best as I could through Greg to really make sure that he's still really upset about this consistent situation that keeps happening to these people that head to war. Nobody's really thinking of their mental well being. So even though he's feeling positive about it in some points, there's still a subterfuge of anger and fear and spiraling that he still has to anchor himself to make sure he doesn't slip into, which is kind of how it is. I'm so glad you liked that story. It's one of my
I really did. It's awesome. So, next up in the category of wrath, we have your story In the Interest of Time. What can you tell us
yeah.
about this?
So the interest of time, you immediately know that there is one man torturing another. That's, like I said, drop you into what's happening very, very quickly. This was one of my stories that started off as a screenplay. And I think because it's just very visual, and I lay things out very meticulously. I was watching a lot of Dexter. It was, it was very inspired. We've kind of had it for several decades, this true crime fascination, but it was when the true crime podcast really started picking up and all the cold cases were getting brought to the surface and everyday people were solving them and everyday people were, taking justice in their own hands. I wasn't necessarily inspired by that. I thought it was a little bit scary. And, obviously you're just so infuriated that, either, they had slipped through some kind of law enforcement loophole or whatever, what have you. It did not go the way it was supposed to for justice to be served the way people wanted it to be, or too many decades too late. So I was really inspired to write a story about somebody taking that into their own hands and being like, these are the things that you've done. I've studied you. I know what you're about. And here's where you serve your penance. And I think that was one of my flashy, gory, slashy episode.
It's filed under wrath.
Yeah.
Anything less would be a bit of a letdown. So, one thing I want to point out is that before every story, you have a smidgen of prologue, and it could be a snatch of dialogue. It could be something written on a bathroom wall, an entry into a diary that already relates to the sin in question and roots you in the character voice, the time and place. I thought that was really elegant, and I haven't seen it anywhere else.
Thank you. It was really about getting into the story as quickly as possible, but also as much sin is in this book. All of these pieces and a lot of these characters are super relatable to folks. I feel like we've all experienced, hopefully for all of us now, all hate at one time. But I think that it was important for me to tell you exactly who you were dealing with when you got into the story. You can tell that they're just being completely authentic, they're being completely open, and they're being 100% who they are.
It is super efficient, and it's a hook. You're hooked before you even get to the title of the story, which is amazing.
Thanks.
I got to steal that and start doing that. No, I
Go
love
for
the
it.
slow burn too much. And then suddenly.
Yeah.
So your story for Envy is called Free Weight, and it begs the question, Why you got to pick on Stephen King?
I have to. I have to. I have always wanted to write a cabin story. Ever since reading like Secret Gardens, I've always wanted that. The dark half. He's like torture writer central, but also like having that inspiration from like Ray Bradbury in that really atmospheric, angsty piece that has just never left this man. And Freeway, incidentally, was the pilot to this series that was gonna open it all. That series was called The Chasm and the Caveat, and it had an overarching story with the story in the middle. Very creepshow. But what I loved about writing this story is there's nothing about this guy that's likable. Like, where's his redemption arc? I'm like, you have no idea. There is a redemption arc for this man. Like, it's envy, man. He's trying to best anyone by any means necessary, and he's never the problem. Like, how many people in our lives do we know that have never the problem? Like, they're never accountable for anything. The world's mean to them and they don't know why. That is Colin Auberon. He's a writer. He's been kind of neck and neck with this other best-selling author. It was his idol when he was growing up. So it's like Pepsi and Coke. So they're kind of always at each other's necks. He finds out that this rival is dying. So, and other than, going to his, this man and giving an olive branch and saying, hey, what's going on? He's trying to kind of bleed him for his thoughts and ideas and things like that he might do to increase his own sales, because he knows now there's nobody to compete against anymore. He doesn't make really great choices, and you see where a lot of his damage comes from. And the more you go back into his past and the more you go back through his vices and the choices he's made, he's literally tornadoed his way through people's lives and he doesn't realize it until it's very, very far too late. It's my favorite.
When you were working on the prose version of Freeway, where you're like, ooh, I've got like a little time saver, or I've got a way I can twist the knife a little more in the screenplay.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that a lot of the dialogue is extended in the book between there's a scene between Colin and Stephen, who is his rival. And that scene is much bigger in the book than it was in the script. It was very cut and dry, very cantankerous between the two, where Colin kind of tries to not necessarily, schmooze his wife into, saying like, oh, has he talked to you about any other stories he's had? Oh, that must be so wonderful for you two to share. Like, just very like weaselly, and just he was much more gross in the screenplay. In the book, I was able to pull that out a little bit further and really see what made Colin tick.
I've noticed that in this collection, so many of the stories are either between two people or just one person. And a lot of your characters are men.
Yeah.
Is there something about that formula that you think is perfect for drawing out psychological horror?
I think that the more you can isolate your characters in that subgenre, the better. It forces the character to either advocate for themselves when there's a difference of opinion, or it forces the characters to work together or try to outsmart each other. So you have three buckets you can go in with that type of subgenre. On a gender aspect, I didn't realize until I had almost finished the book that most of my characters were men. I think I've just always had an easier time writing male characters. I don't know what it is. I didn't have a lot of girlfriends as a child. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or if it's just like growing up around that. And also having authors that I was inspired by writing in that voice and writing about what they knew, which was being a boy, being a man, writing about other men. I think one of the books on male characters that really helped me kind of build my writing style, now that I think about it, like actually in this moment, was probably The Illustrated Man through Ray Bradbury. It was one of my absolute favorite short story collections. And I think that that's kind of where I got the stories that I started writing were always that kind of centric, which is why for my behavioral science, my focus is on PTSD in women. Because I think that it's important for me to well round myself. I don't feel like that's not to say that I feel like I know exactly what is inside the male mind, because I don't. I don't.
Which brings us perfectly to the next story in the collection, Lust, your first female character.
This one is fun to me. This one is me channeling like that fun horror from like early mid 80s Tales from the Dark Side. Like, this is a Tales from the Dark Side story. It's got that like kitschy silliness to it. It's got some gore to it. She's had enough. I started writing this when I was listening to a lot of self-help stuff. And, I think we were all kind of going through it during the pandemic, right? Like, we were all kind of just like, what is my life? What's going on with the world? And I was listening to a lot of old poetry. And there was one that was about basically like loving someone to death. And it was just like, is it going to be your death or mine? I haven't decided. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of that's a little aggressive. And I kind of took that feeling with me when I wrote this story. And I feel like it was, you feel for this woman, her husband has just passed away. She's really, really out of sorts. She's still laying out his clothes like he's there. She's still making 2 cups of coffee in the morning. She is having a hard time with the grief of it. And then she remembers, oh, he was pretty much cheating on me the whole time. So am I sad?
I thought it was so interesting that the antagonist wasn't the unfaithful husband. It was the unfaithful husband's mother.
Yeah. 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 The blame doesn't go where it belongs. When you think about how dynamics of people, like when they split up or they leave somebody for somebody else, like one person is always mad at who they left them for, not the person who's doing the leaving. And it's like, why do our brains do that? Why can't we blame the person who's actually responsible? That was something I really wanted to work through with Agnes, was like that, even though you're so angry and this is what's happened, this displacement is not in the right place. So it'll take care of itself. And it does.
Sloth was beautifully realized, definitely delivered some of the hardest gut punches for me. There's this detail that you put in where he no longer has to deliver his wife's medicine, but that's still like a constant anxiety of his. And I know what that's like, where your day is segmented when you're a caregiver.
Yeah.
No matter what else is happening in my day, I know that once or twice or 3 times a day, I need to deliver this pill. Mm-hmm. And then when you take that part out of your schedule, it makes your whole day mushy and unorganized. And you're like, oh, I have this sudden anxiety because there's a thing I need to do. Oh, wait, I don't need to do it. Oh, too bad. You still have the anxiety. Yeah. That one was so visceral, and I felt that so acutely. And that's just one of like 100 things in the story that really land, and the journey you go on, the way you flip the story and the revelations and how they roll out. Oof. Mm-hmm. Sloth was really good.
Thank you. Yeah, I just feel like we can all get like William, especially if we lose somebody that we care so much about, losing a parent or losing a sibling, or you were supposed to be there to take care of them. And then you just couldn't. It wasn't in your failure. It was just something that just couldn't be done anymore. And you still feel like, where's my purpose? What am I supposed to be doing? I mean, that's why he doesn't erase the alarm. The dead pill 2, dead pill 3. Like, he doesn't know how to let go of that piece. Goes to this island off the New England coast, just trying to be old man of the sea and just being like, I don't need anybody. This is the life of luxury. And all he has is that silence and the alarms. He's got this love for his wife still, and then this disdain for his child. And he doesn't know how to rectify either one of them. And
the things that are waiting in that silence.
Yeah, I'm so happy that connected with you. Oh gosh, I wrote that because I too have done that. So it's hard. That's why I feel like a lot of these pieces, a lot of these characters are just like, we've done this. We've been these people, as ugly as they can be at times. Like we've felt these things, and we can't get away from that. And that's the scary part sometimes. Why did I get so angry then? Or why did that make me so sad? Or, I don't care what they're doing. Why is that making me jealous? It didn't have anything to do with the next story.
Well, I feel like Gluttony was a bit of a palate cleanser. A quick, nasty little story, and I really liked it. I don't know how much you can say about it.
I mean, it's the shortest story in the book. It's less than like 250 words. It's about this couple, this man who was basically telling the reader, I've never met a woman like this, and I am absolutely in love with her. Every part of her, we're getting married, we're going to have a life together, and it's very digestive. You'll eat it up, folks.
It is delicious. You will want a second serving of gluttony.
This next one was so fun to think about. My youngest and I had just watched The Men in Blacks. And it was faced with that scenario of like knowing where there's aliens out there, like who can you trust, X, Y, and Z. And when you're part of the system, do you work for yourself or do you work for the greater good? You know, you have this very like meek toll booth operator. Nothing exciting ever happens to him. He just like takes all the extra time and a half. He's like banking money. This car comes through the toll and it just does not stop coming. It's just a consistent time loop until he can get it right. And right is very relative.
I thought this was the biggest departure from the tone and subgenre of the different
Very
stories.
weird.
Very welcome, because that's my jam. I love that kind of stuff. But it was so visual, with the car screaming through the toll booth over and over again in the dead of night. And you've created that isolation that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add in a crisis and a dilemma and a twist. It's a really fun one. Was this written specifically for a call for like a different anthology, or
No,
just
this
off the
was
dome?
really just
Men in Black. This was your version of Men.
was my Men in Black, but it really speaks to like this in itself. I mean, it's like, you know, people that get bribed. You're making that decision because of greed. How can we make our lives better at somebody else's expense? Like, how, no matter how minimal, that's something that a human will do. And things are tough all over. Eli has something to lose as well. And you do find that out in the story. So he can't afford to make a mistake. He can't afford to be soft. He can't afford to make concessions. You know, we find that out really starkly at the end. We start the story off, which is very mundane. And then in the middle of it, we tell you that there's a mandate on aliens. The government, like, what? Where are we? What time of and place is this? What time in the world? And I think that was a really fun way to drop that part in. I'm a sucker for time loop in film and literature. Now I got it out of my system and really, really enjoyed writing it.
But you can have all these different high concept genre things in it. It doesn't change human nature, which is what the story's about.
Yep, absolutely timeless. Pride.
How much of Pride is informed by your experience with the entertainment industry? Just asking.
Oh, this story is funnily enough about an ex. Not the whole story, but inspired by a singular conversation where I was like, you are the least self-aware person. And it was just, really kind of working through what the entertainment industry does to you, where it's the roller coaster of high. And then like when it's low, it's so low and people love bringing you lower. And your desperation for that high is a little bit like an abusive relationship. This story is just called Eager because it's really like he's just so eager to get back onto what he believes is the top that he will do anything, but not clearly not the right way. And it's written as a video diary, kind of drops you into the story. This is where it all kind of went south for me. He used to be a brilliant actor, brilliant writer, doing this, that, and the other thing. And now he's being offered like to be a jelly bean in a commercial.
A dancing jelly bean.
But it's really him just whining about my life is just like, why is the world so awful to me? Meets this guy who is a, quote unquote guru, life coach. He offers to help him on a very supernatural level. Lucas definitely tries to succeed, and you'll have to read if he does. It was very cathartic for me as, working in the industry and also having interpersonal relationships with people who are in that attention seeking piece. Yeah, I love Eager.
The conceit of the video diary is very clever for pinning down that first person perspective, but also making it visual and keeping it moving.
I've made 8 stories found in sin, disquieting ones at that.
Do you have a minute to tell us about Clairviolence?
Yeah, so Clairviolence should be out later this year. It's told in 2 volumes, so each story is based on one of the cards from the major arcana of the tarot. It's another short story collection, but This one is so much fun, but I'm so glad that you talked about the departure of Things Are Tough All Over from the rest of the work in Love the Sinner, because Claire Violence is all over the place. There's new weird in there, there's sci-fi horror, there's body horror in there, there's erotic horror in there. It's a very mixed bag. And just like Love the Sinner, it's not about the pinpoint definition of what these cards mean, but the kind of the overarching symbolism that they carry. I've been a card reader for about 30 years. I've done it ever since I was like 14, 15, 16 years old. So I've always had that interest and, always kind of wanted to do an homage to that. And I just never could figure out why. And I never wanted to do like one card for a subject, because there's just so many permutations and to what they could possibly be. And I think that having these 2-volume collection, because I've split it for 11 in each volume, the major arcana, the big guns of the deck, was a little bit easier for me to give them more time to breathe, more character development. I'm very excited for those collections to come out.
So where can our listeners find you online?
Oh, I am on the artist formerly known as Twitter at momoshaty.com. I'm on Instagram at momoshaty.com. You can always find me writing for nighttidemag.com. That's our Nighttide magazine. I'll be at StokerCon. We already have a virtual panel for what we can learn from grief and horror. I was the proctor for that one. That's part of the virtual Stoker, which is also available for anyone that has a Stoker ticket. Scream Queens, which we're talking about like film and literary Scream Queens. And those will all be online after StokerCon, I believe. They'll be available virtually.
Well, Mo, thank you for hanging out with us.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.